Hello, welcome to the first episode of the CP Performance Podcast. So what I wanted to do was give you a good introduction as to what CP is and means to us and me, and what the outline of the series is, who's going to be involved and how the series will work. So Ceteris Paribus Performance is a concept that I come up with quite recently actually, after coming up to 10 years working in the fitness and strength and conditioning industry. I worked for the last 7 years with professional athletes, including lots of female football players, over the last 4 years at Chelsea Women. So prior to this, I was working for Wasps Academy under some incredible coaches, including the likes of Ian Taplin and Tom Farrow from Arete Performance. And what this all led to basically was my development as a strength and conditioning coach and my progression through a pretty awesome career where I was able to work for some incredible male, female, youth and senior athletes. So with my exposure being to quite an extensive range of athletes, it actually developed my philosophy of strength and conditioning and coaching as to manipulating the athlete in the middle of a constraints-based environment. So this is where Ceteris Paribus comes in. So Ceteris Paribus is actually taken from economics. It's used quite frequently in theoretical economics. It translates from Latin to all other things being equal. So why is this significant? Well, from a coaching perspective, the constraints of sport are set. There are set rules and regulations in which you are expected to compete. So for instance, the rules and regulations themselves are the constraints, the size of the pitch, the time of the match, the number of players on the grass, etc. So because these constraints are actually set on each athlete, this is where, for me, the Ceteris Paribus comes into it. All other things being equal allows for a manipulation of you as the athlete in the centre. So if you're 1% smarter, 1% fitter, 1% fresher than your opponent, and you're both set in the same constraints, you're both on the same field, you both have the same rules and regulations, you will be at a physical advantage. So what you may be thinking then is, well, how does this podcast help me? So the actual aim of the CP Performance Podcast is to help educate not only the athletes in and around challenges that other athletes have faced, but also coaches as well in their thought process around how to approach different athletes. So hopefully I've actually, enticed you to listen on further. And what I'll do now is I'll give you a good explanation of what the actual series is all about and who's going to be involved, because that's what will keep you here. And I think some of the guests we have on are incredible. So Series 1 is all about the players' perspectives. So I was fortunate enough to work quite closely with a lot of the players that have been involved in the first series, and they have all done me a massive favour in being guests on this podcast. So for instance, the first guest that we're going to release immediately after this podcast is Ali Riley, the captain of the New Zealand Football Ferns. And we're also fortunate enough to have guests like Hedvig Lindahl, Swedish goalkeeping legend, and some others such as Deanna Cooper, who's a Chelsea centre-back, and Gemma Davison, who's currently a Reading forward. So the way this series will actually work is I'm going to release once a week a interview with a player. I've got 7 players lined up, including those just said previously. And then the following week, I'm going to release a synopsis. So you'll be fortunate enough to listen to the interview first, and it will be a 30-minute-ish podcast. I wanted to keep everything nice and short and sweet. I didn't want to make podcasts real long. And it will be discussing things in and around challenges that they've had to face and overcome, how they've progressed through their career, whether that's challenges via injuries or other challenges such as education and things like that. And we'll be discussing not only challenges they've overcome, but if they've got any advice, hints and tips for young aspiring athletes coming through the actual system now. So each of the guests is a professional female footballer in Series 1, either in the WSL or the Championship at the moment, and it was actually recorded prior to the World Cup. So I've actually taken a little bit of time of editing and planning and prepping this so that everything comes out as a really valuable product for you, the listener. So not only will players be discussing challenges they've had to face and overcome, they'll also be discussing approaches in coaching that they feel have really worked to help and progress them further and help their development. So for instance, we talk with one individual about how she likes to be really free and have conversations in the gym instead of being constantly guided like in an old school military type fashion, and how she prefers a complete opposite approach on the grass, where she wants to know exactly what to do, when, where and how. So the nice thing about the actual interviews is that you'll get lots of different perspectives and opinions, and it actually makes you really think. If you're an athlete, it makes you think, what actually works for me? And if you're a coach, it makes you sit back and think, have I actually approached my athletes in the way that gets the best out of them, that really challenges them and helps them to develop to be the best they can possibly be. So obviously that's the interview side of it. So that would be part A of every release. Part B is then the synopsis. That's me talking for 15 to 20 minutes, no more, about what we've heard, the breakdown of what the interview was about, the key areas, the key challenges, the key focuses on what they like to do and how they like to do it, and is there a way that I can apply it as an athlete, or is there an approach as a coach that I can use to change and develop as well? Really trying to break down and get into some of the theory side of what they've suggested. So the reason I actually wanted to do this podcast was because I felt that a lot of podcasts out there, and please message me and correct me if I'm wrong, were interviewing and listening to other strength and conditioning coaches, other researchers, other specialists in their field, but I didn't find many that were actually approaching athletes and, trying to get live examples of what they're doing and how they're doing it to bring out the best in them and putting it out there for us. What I'd also like to say as well is if you're a young aspiring athlete or a professional athlete even listening to this and you want to have a chat and get on here and share some of your experiences, then please just approach me via the social media pages at CP Perform UK, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and let's have a chat and see if we can get you on, see if you can share some of your experiences as well. So hopefully I've enticed you to listen more. So what I want to do now is talk to you about a couple of experiences that I had whilst working for Chelsea Women. So I was fortunate enough to be in a full-time professional environment where objectivity was the key, and we had to collect data to monitor and make sure players were constantly being observed and prepped and made sure that everything was objectified so that there was no subjectivity involved in it at all, which as a strength and conditioning coach or physiologist or physical performance coach, you should be aspiring to do with your athletes all the time. So like I say, I was in a very fortunate environment where I had access to resources that some clubs don't have, especially in the women's game still. So we would be monitoring on a daily basis, general wellness, as well as having tracked athletes with heart rate and GPS data. So we use a system called Catapult, which is actually the sister system to our sponsor for this podcast series. So what we would do on a daily basis, obviously making sure the athletes were wearing the units and the heart rate monitors, and we would take things like total distance covered and look at the volume of the work they've done, as well as looking at different ratios of high speed running to make sure we was mitigating against hamstring injuries, recurring hamstring injuries in certain athletes, and totally trying to prevent soft tissue injuries in those that had not been previously injured. So this was obviously quite a large task. The system Catapult itself is brilliant, but that's an elite level package and system there. So our sponsor Player is the new Smart Football Tracker. So it's the latest in GPS tracking technology, plus it actually gives personalised sports science advice. So Player gives aspiring players a total understanding of how to improve your game and gives you access to elements that pros only could previously access, the stuff that we would have on a full-time basis at Chelsea Women. So this includes things like your metrics in and around total distance covered, speed achieved in your game or training session, and number of sprints that you did as well. What's really nice about the system as well is that it gives you some sports science advice and also hints and tips on the best strategies for recovery. So you're probably asking, why is this important? Well, from my perspective, having worked with Catapult before and knowing that they work with over 2,000 elite teams globally, including the French national team, Chelsea, Ajax and Real Madrid, it gives me a really good understanding that the actual system and the sponsor for this podcast is a very, very reliable resource and a very, very good system. So the reason I'm actually giving you information onto what it is and why is because I wanted to work with a sponsor that was actually relevant to the women's industry and the women's game. And Player actually presented themselves as the perfect sponsor for this podcast. So as a result, I managed to secure a deal where they will actually give a system away in the months of July 2019 and August 2019 to my listeners. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the system, go to playarsmartcoach.com. So that's playarsmartcoach.com, and you can have a look at actually what the product is and how it could help you increasing not only your performance but also staying on a pitch and reducing your injury risk. So if you are interested in getting hold of the Player Smart Football Tracker, it's really simple. All you have to do is like us on social media at CP Perform UK on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and then follow our link and join our mailing list. So you need to be part of the mailing list to be in the draw, and all that requires from you is your first name and your email address. So then what will happen from my side is I will randomly select a contact, so randomly select one of the email addresses, and you'll all receive a email to say who has won it at the end of July 2019 and then also at the end of August 2019. So joining the mailing list also has other benefits. So for instance, you'll get regular updates on the new podcasts when they're coming out, who they are. You'll also get updates on our blog posts. We're going to be doing regular guest blogs from other coaches in the industry, in the male game, in the female game, working across different sports, talking and discussing different strategies for different problems. One example of a future blog we have coming up is going to be the comparison of physical development in young male rugby players and football players from an awesome coach and friend of mine, Jeff Robinson, who's worked as a strength and conditioning coach in both football and rugby academies. Also on the mailing list, we'll be giving regular updates of programs that we will be releasing, in and around off-season training, in-season training, pre-season training, and how to get the most out of your physical development and physical training so that you're able to perform at your peak, all through the season and reduce injury risk as well. And my philosophy and guided approach to S&C, I'm hoping will help you in your physical development. And, as I worked over the last 4 years at Chelsea Women, what we found was with a bigger and bigger squad, we was actually able to keep training and playing availability high. And last season we hit an all-time best of 91% training and game availability. And that was with us managing a squad of 24, whilst competing in the league, 2 domestic cups, and also the Champions League. So hopefully you've got a decent insight into actually what CP Performance is. The idea behind what our podcast is, a little bit about my philosophy as an S&C coach and why I want to do this series, and the actual purpose of Ceteris Paribus, the actual company itself. So thank you ever so much for listening to this short introduction. Again, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at CP Perform UK, and also sign up to our mailing list to get for a chance to win one of the Player Smart Football Tracker units, actually retailing at nearly £170, which is actually an extremely affordable piece of kit considering the technology and the research behind it. And if you are the lucky winner of this piece of technology, not only will the rest of the mailing list know that you've won it, I will personally help you plan the next 4-week strength and conditioning block in your training cycle. So once again, I just want to thank you for listening to this. I want to encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. I'm really excited about where this is going to go and how this is going to help lots of individuals in the future. And join in, share, get on the social media and enjoy it. And, reach out, message me if you want to know anything in particular or if you want to get involved in some of the other stuff we're doing. Thank you.